We have an update for pistol braces, and it's a court loss in the Federal District Court of North Dakota. I'm going to be breaking this down for you about what happened, how did we get here, and maybe even more important than that, what does it mean? We're talking about FRAC, that's the Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition versus Garland in North Dakota. Let's get into it. So Firearms Regulatory Accountability Coalition. Try saying that 10 times fast. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to call it FRAC. So they sued in North Dakota federal court and sought what's called a preliminary injunction in order to prohibit the enforcement of the pistol brace ban. Now, as discussed elsewhere in other videos, a preliminary injunction is the second type of injunction that plaintiffs can seek. So that's the good guys here. Plaintiffs being the pro-Second Amendment folks, that they can seek as they basically move through the judicial process from filing and kind of down the pipes. First, as you may recall, there's what's called a temporary restraining order, or TRO, that can be used basically right off the bat in order to get an injunction in place right as the case is entering court. Now, that often only lasts as long as both parties are going to be able to brief their issues and then basically re-deal with things, sometimes in a number of weeks or a couple months later, at where we are here in this case, the preliminary injunction. So we go TRO right off the bat. That can happen within days, maybe hours, but days, maybe a couple weeks. And then we get to the preliminary injunction phase where we're talking weeks or maybe a couple months in. This is where cases have had a little bit of meat put on the bones as far as both sides briefing their issues, and the judge can presumably get their arms around it a little bit more. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more complicated and nuanced than all this, but that degree of low resolution for what we just covered suits our purposes just fine for right now. So the plaintiff, in order to win an injunction, needs to demonstrate really canonically 4 things, but we typically only talk about 2. I try to alternate videos about, do I give you all 4? Do I give you 2? I haven't done all 4 in a bit, so we're going to do that here. Number 1, the threat of irreparable harm to the movement. That's the person suing. That's FRAC. Number 2, the state of balance between this harm and the injury that granting the injunction will inflict on other parties litigant. So in other words, what's going to be kind of the balance of how harmed will the ATF be versus how harmed will FRAC and the petitioners be. Number 3, the probability that the movement, that's FRAC, that the movement will succeed on the merits. And 4, the public interest. Now, I mentioned that I usually only do 2, and that's basically numbers 1 and 3, the above, which is the threat to irreparable harm combined with the probability of succeeding on the merits. Because usually that's kind of what these things tend to boil down to. So the judge here really focused on number 3. That's the probability that the movement will succeed on the merits. Or to put more plainly, based on what we have seen so far, who will probably win? Again, not exactly correct, by no means technically correct, but that's kind of the gist to it. Can the plaintiff establish that they have a good chance of winning this case? So the judge in this case sided with the government in banning pistol braces across the board on all the arguments. Why? Well, other courts, such as the Fifth Circuit and elsewhere that we have covered in all of our different videos on the pistol brace side, have all sided, almost all of them, there's one exception I'll get to later on, with the pro-gun side, with the Second Amendment side. Where did this judge, who, by the way, is a George W. Bush appointee from 2002, zig, where the others zagged? So let's take a look at the 23-page decision, which, by the way, is linked in the description box below. So we start off with the Second Amendment challenge, and I'm going to read a little bit from the decision. Quote, at the outset, it is clear that uniquely dangerous weapons, including short-barreled rifles, are not protected by the Second Amendment. This lawsuit is not a challenge to the constitutionality of the final rule. The United States Supreme Court recognized in Heller that the Second Amendment does not protect weapons not typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes such as short-barreled shotguns, end quote. So that was where Heller was, of course, talking about the Miller decision, which came out of the late 1930s, which is all topics for another video. We're not going to have enough time to talk about that today. What does that mean in English? Well, in English, the Second Amendment does not offer protection to quote-unquote dangerous and unusual weapons. And this actually goes back all the way through English common law, where those started to get singled out. So it's something that's by no means new. It's not a novel invention. And we're actually going to be, I've got a slow burn research project to really dig down on what all that is, because I've got interesting examples going back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So that is coming. Here, however, the judge cites to both pre and post Brune cases. That's the massive U.S. Supreme Court case that came out in June of 2022. He cites to specifically U.S. v. Cox, that's COX, as well as U.S. v. Royce, respectively, where short-barreled rifles and shotguns have been ruled as being unusual and therefore not protected by the Second Amendment. So the judge cites the two cases where short-barreled shotguns and short-barreled rifles have been cited as not being protected by the Second Amendment due to them being unusual. I'll pause here and just, of course, cite for the fact that, look, in 2023, we've been dealing with the National Firearms Act since 1934, so we're coming up on 100 years, 89 years. That's lawyer math off the top of my head. I look forward to being corrected on that in the comment section. If you make something virtually impossible in many states, entirely impossible, but in other states, you have to jump through this onerous registration and application process, of course there's going to be far less of them. So there's a little bit of kind of the chicken and the egg of the court on the one hand saying, well, look, these are unusual weapons, therefore they don't get constitutional protection. On the other hand, yeah, they're unusual because you've basically made it almost impossible for a lot of folks to get them, entirely impossible for other folks to get them because of a complicated process of filing Form 1s, Form 4s, maybe Form 5s for some of you out there and all that other kind of stuff. I get it. That's a little bit of my high horse. Now back to the decision. The judge then basically goes on to equate the pistols with the stabilizing braces as nothing more than a short-barreled rifle in all but name. And when you have that, it is a short-barreled rifle in the judge's view. In brief, he's buying what the ATF is selling for better or worse, depending upon where you stand. But he takes it to another step and he takes it to another place by upping the stakes on something that, even though he didn't really go into it a whole lot, I found to be some pretty scary ground that I wanted to share with you about because it affects so many other things that we've been covering on this channel as well as litigation elsewhere around the country. And that's the fact that this judge went out of his way to say things like braces and other things, other accessories are not protected by the Second Amendment. What are other things that we're arguing about right now as far as accessories and whether or not they're protected by the Second Amendment? Things like magazines, things like pistols, things like, when I say pistols, I'm talking about pistol grips on things like AR-15s and rifles and that kind of stuff. Are those kind of accoutrements, as they have been legally described, or accessories, as the judge here describes it, are those protected by the Second Amendment? Because if they are not, we're back to basically 5-shot J-frame revolvers is invariably where this will go, if not Derringers or something even less than that. This judge here, in saying that, look, accessories are not protected by the Second Amendment, he cites to a pre-Brune decision. And if you want me to do a video looking at that particular decision and about how it may stand up to scrutiny in the post-Brune world, of course, please let me know in the comment section below. But again, for time, we've got to press on right now. Lastly, the judge also cites the registration option, which was, of course, given by the ATF, as basically a constitutional pressure release valve that is good enough and considers it an example of a legal, reasonable licensing regime associated with the ownership of firearms. I'm basically quoting from that. Don't get angry at me. I'm quoting from the judge's decision on that. And he's quoting from Heller, and Heller basically stood for many things, but among them the principle that they were not trying to topple the apple cart. I'm not going to say upset the apple cart, but topple the apple cart when it came to the commercial licensing and that kind of stuff. Whether Heller was referring to the existence of the Gun Control Act FFL paradigm or here the 1934 open for discussion. We're talking about the National Firearms Act, although again, Heller did go into this when it came to the Miller decision. I realize I'm getting very technical here. I'm trying to pack a lot in, but Heller did basically keep the lane open for dangerous or unusual weapons. The question is what counts as dangerous or unusual? And this judge is saying SBRs, short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, and pistol braces, which are nothing but SBRs, absolutely count. There's more things we've got to get through. The judge next turns to, of course, the very famous Fifth Circuit Court decision, Mock v. Garland. Again, I've got a whole playlist on pistol braces, so check that out. I'm going to stop referencing that right now. Everything you want to know is in our pistol brace playlist. As a quick reminder for those of you who may not know about this, the Mock case was filed by the Firearms Policy Coalition, fantastic group who, along with the Gun Owners of America and other groups like Second Amendment Foundation and so forth, do an amazing job of protecting our Second Amendment, filing lawsuits all over the country, deserve your support, deserve your membership. FPC actually saw an initial courtroom loss in the Federal District Court before going up to the Fifth Circuit Court and gaining the 2-1 win in the Court of Appeals. Again, we've got lawsuits get filed in the federal district court. That's the federal trial court. And then they get appealed by whoever is eligible to appeal, if they wish, up to the federal circuit court. So here we've got the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which oversees Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And then above them, we go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. So federal district court, that's where we were in Mock, where they initially lost before winning in the Fifth. And now we'll see where it goes as far as the U.S. Supreme Court. Here in North Dakota, we're only right now in that district court, the trial court, okay? And in brief, basically the judge in North Dakota says, yeah, I'm siding with the one judge who dissented in that opinion, okay? Lastly, the judge also shoots down arguments surrounding the rule of lenity, as well as the Administrative Procedures Act violations for being possibly arbitrary and capricious. These are two common features that we've seen in other lawsuits. Very quickly, for those of you who don't know, the rule of lenity argument basically stands for the premise that if you want tyranny, allow the government to create vague laws and then enforce them against any number of unsuspecting folks who may have thought they were in compliance with it, but it's worded so vaguely that maybe you weren't. And if you want tyranny, that's a great way to get tyranny. So we have a common law defense called the rule of lenity, Lenity. If you're listening to this while driving somewhere. And that's, again, the common law defense that, look, if you have a statute, if you have a law that's vague, if the defendant can construct a reasonable interpretation of it that is exculpatory, in other words, that creates a defense, then a judge ought to, in the case of a vague and unreasonably vague law, unreasonably vague statute, should be able to give the defendant that reasonable interpretation. The judge says here, rule of lenity does not fly because in the judge's view, look, I read the National Firearms Act, I read the Gun Control Act, I look at the definition of what constitutes a short barrel rifle, which of course, very briefly, overall length less than 26 inches and or a barrel length of less than 16 inches, combined with it having a rifle bore designed to be fired from the shoulder. And I looked at a pistol-braced pistol and I see basically the same thing. This is that office meme. Corporate wants to distinguish between these two pictures and the judge is saying, it's the same picture. I don't agree with that, but hey, the judge didn't call me. It is what it is. As for the APA, the Administrative Procedures Act, again, another common feature to a lot of these lawsuits. So the APA's arbitrary and capricious standard requires that an agency, that includes the ATF, it requires that an agency action be reasonable and reasonably explained. Okay, so remember, ATF does not make law. They make interpretations. Those interpretations are subject to any number of regulations, including by the Administrative Procedures Act. In evaluating an arbitrary and capricious challenge, a court basically must ensure that the agency has acted within a zone of reasonableness, and in particular, has reasonably considered the relevant issues and reasonably explained the decision about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So the judge here reasoned that the final rule, that's the one that was passed back in January of 2023, explains that a firearm marked as a pistol that is a variant of a firearm, the ATF will compare the weight and the length to those of variants designed, made, and intended to be fired from the shoulder. In other words, again, this is that office meme. Corporate wants you to compare these two pictures. And if you take a pistol-braced pistol and you combine that with an SBR, the judge is saying, yeah, by length, by a quick snapshot overview, by weight, these appear to be the same thing. And therefore, this is not arbitrary and capricious because it's within the zone of reasonableness, according to this judge. Now, this, of course, seemingly ignores a lot of extensive issues involving how did we go from a worksheet to a final rule that bore no resemblance to each other. Again, we've covered these in other videos. Not going to keep belaboring that point, but for time, we got to move on. Before I give you my final breakdown and analysis about what this all means, and of course, our ever popular quote of the day, if you've not already done so, please consider clicking like. It tells both myself and Derek behind the camera that this is good stuff. You want to see more stuff like this. This is worth our time because it's worth your time as well. And of course, don't forget to leave us a comment about what you thought about all of this. And now on to our bottom line and then quote of the day. Here's the bottom line to me. This means that FRAC members will, of course, not be covered in the same way that FPC and GOA members are, among others groups with their own injunctions. And of course, however that means and however that's going to be enforced. It also means that this lawsuit is not on the strongest of footing, at least in the eyes of this judge. Why should you care about this? Number one, it's a judicial data point that serves to show that the Second Amendment, it's not safe in one party or the other. This was a Republican-appointed judge. We must expand and grow the 2A tent in order to save it. We cannot trust it to a single political party or idea. And frankly, even if we could, that's not the 2A, that's not the Second Amendment as I see it. But more on that concept and kind of my ideas, if you're crazy enough to want me to get into that in another video. This judicial data point will also serve to bolster other judges in other jurisdictions to possibly rule the other way than what the Fifth Circuit and then, of course, the follow-up district courts did following Mock versus Garland. This judge has gone out of his way to, rather than punt or take a knee until SCOTUS or possibly someone else gets involved and we see a collective resolution around the country, to instead fly his flag and make a point. While isolated and of limited precedential value, really not much to none at all, it is nevertheless discouraging, particularly given the judge's presumptive political leanings based on who appointed them. And of course, the less we have to go on and say about what this judge did as far as flying the flag, we're talking about accessories and being protected by the Second Amendment, so much the better. A quote of the day comes from Leonardo da Vinci, quote, "I awoke only to see that the rest of the world is still asleep." We hope you enjoyed this one. As always, I'll see you in the comment sections and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content and we'll see you in the next one.